Don't think so.
All right, his name is Norton.
It's not the getting up, it's the getting down.
Every night, you have families killed.
Pardon me. Excuse me.
When your number is called, step forward and repeat the phrase you've been given. Understand?
I went to Israel because I wished to live there as a Jew.
What does it feel like, sharing the corridors of the street with legal criminals? Recently, the outburst and sensational chaos of criminal families has escalated, with dubious godfathers exerting control over the streets of major cities in the world. Despite law enforcement's efforts, their reign of terror remains unbroken, spanning from the rough streets of New York to the hidden corners of Chicago and beyond. Here we present 10 dynamic criminal families and their intriguing bosses who keep the underworld alive. Their activities ranging from stealing ration stamps during World War II to Gambino's lucrative ventures in the black market, amassing millions. Number 10. Banano crime family. Let's start with the captivating and shadowy history of the Banano crime family, one of the most infamous criminal organizations in the United States. This story is jam-packed with drama, violence, and unexpected twists. The Banano family's story is an epic tale of resilience, determination, and the dark charm of organized crime. It's a roller coaster ride you won't want to miss, filled with twists, turns, and enough drama to keep you on the edge of your seat. In the early 20th century, a group of Sicilian immigrants arrived in the bustling streets of New York City. Little did anyone know that this seemingly ordinary group would become the stuff of legends in the criminal underworld. They called themselves the Banano family and quickly gained a reputation for being ruthless and downright terrifying. Fast forward a bit. The Banano family became one of the 5 families that ruled the New York Mafia. These guys were serious business. They were involved in illegal activities like gambling, loan sharking, and extortion. They had their hands on everything and weren't afraid to get their hands dirty. But here's where things get really interesting. The Banano family had a knack for expanding their empire far and wide. They weren't content with ruling New York City. They wanted it all. They set up shops in California, Arizona, Canada, and Cuba. Talk about ambition! One of their most audacious endeavors was a massive money laundering conspiracy. They were like master magicians, using a web of shell companies and offshore accounts to hide their ill-gotten gains. It was like something straight out of a Hollywood movie, except this was real life. Now, let's talk about the big boss, Joseph Banano, or as he was affectionately known, Joe Bananas. This guy was a legend. He led the family from 1931 to 1965 and turned them into one of the most powerful criminal organizations in the country. But like any good crime story, his reign had its fair share of challenges. During Joe Bananas' reign, internal conflicts and power struggles plagued the Banano family. It was like a soap opera filled with betrayal and backstabbing. These guys could have given Shakespeare a run for his money. But wait, it gets even juicier. Enter Joseph Massino, also known as the Last Don. He took over as the boss in the early 90s and worked tirelessly to rebuild the family's power. But guess what? He got caught up in a web of murder and racketeering charges. Talk about a plot twist. Here's where it gets really wild. Massino became the first ever mafia boss to flip and become an informant. He spilled the beans on all his former associates, leading to a cascade of high-ranking mobsters getting arrested. It was like the ultimate betrayal within the criminal underworld. Vincent Basciano, aka Vinny Gorgeous, briefly stepped into the role of acting boss after Massino's downfall. But his stint was cut short when he was arrested and convicted of murder. Life imitates art, right? The Banano family's history is filled with intense rivalries, grand jury investigations, and law enforcement pressure. They've gone head-to-head with other mafia families like the Genovesi and Lucchese. It's like a never-ending game of cat and mouse, with everyone vying for power and control. As we look to the future, it's uncertain what lies ahead for the Banano family. Can they rise from the ashes of their turbulent past, or will they crumble under the weight of their own misdeeds? Only time will tell. But one thing's for sure, law enforcement is hot on their trail. They're doing everything possible to bring down criminal networks like the Banano family. It's a high-stakes chess game, and the FBI and police aren't backing down. Number 9. Bobby Bogle. What happens when a father raises the entire family members to be criminals? Just before you throw a gesture answer from wells of unbelief, here is a shocking reality story of the Bogle. Young Bobby Bogle woke up on a Christmas morning in 1969 when he found a gift from his dad, a heavy metal wrench in a plain brown paper bag. Even at age 4, Bobby understood the message behind the gift. Later that day, Bobby and his brothers used the wrench to break into a local grocery store and steal some soda. When their father, a career criminal known as Rooster, learned about their burglary, he didn't scold them. Instead, he smiled proudly and said, "Yeah, that's my son." This incident began a long and troubling criminal journey for the Bogle family. Their illegal activities spanned 4 generations and multiple states, starting in the early 1920s. Their family tree included moonshiners, carnival workers, and many lawbreakers involved in numerous felonies, such as murder, sodomy, burglary, and insurance fraud. The Bogles didn't settle for ordinary crimes. They had a knack for going above and beyond. They stole everything from chickens and cows to lumber and metal. They once even broke into a government-run fish hatchery to feast on salmon. When the Bogle children were barely in middle school, they were already stealing 18-wheelers, even though they could barely reach the pedals. Their criminal endeavors were often outrageous and bizarre, becoming part of their family mythology. They didn't just break the law, they embraced being outlaws and reveled in their notoriety. Breaking away from the family's criminal legacy is rare among the Bogles. However, one granddaughter named Ashley managed to escape the cycle. She became the first Bogle to attend and graduate college despite having a younger sister who struggled with drug addiction and ended up in jail. Ashley's determination and emotional distance from her family's criminal activities significantly impacted her success. Today, Ashley is a single mother working as a medical records technician. She has overcome the stigma attached to her family name, focusing on making choices and providing a different path for her child. Butterfield keeps in touch with Ashley, offering support and checking her progress. The story of the Bogle family reveals that criminal behavior can be influenced by complex factors, and the traditional understanding of family dynamics may not always hold true. By examining the underlying causes and implementing innovative approaches, we can strive to break the cycle of criminality and create a safer society. Number 8. The Gambino crime family. The Gambino crime family is a well-known group of criminals in America. They started back in the early 90s with Salvatore D'Aquila as their leader. They became one of the 5 families in New York and were part of a governing board called the Commission for Organized Crime Families. After D'Aquila was killed in 1928, Frank Scalise took over as the boss, but he didn't last long. Vincent Mangano came next and ruled for a long time, making the family even more powerful. Then, in 1951, Albert Anastasia took charge. He was known for a group called Murder Incorporated, which did a lot of mob-related killings. Anastasia was seen as dangerous and even crazy by some of his own people. They plotted against him and eventually murdered him in 1957. Carlo Gambino became the next boss, and he was incredibly successful. He made the family even more robust and made a ton of money. He was cautious and managed to avoid getting caught for any crimes. He led the family until he died in 1976, and then his brother-in-law, Paul Castellano, took over. This upset Gambino's right-hand man, Neil Della Croce, but Castellano kept him in an important position. Some members of the family didn't like how Castellano ran things. They thought he focused too much on business and didn't act like an absolute boss. 2 weeks after Della Croce died in 1985, Castellano was murdered on the orders of one of his people, John Gotti. Gotti became the new boss of the Gambino crime family, with his right-hand man, Sammy the Bull, Grava number Gotti, was good at avoiding getting caught and was nicknamed the Teflon Don because nothing seemed to stick to him. He went through 3 trials without being found guilty. But things changed in the early 1990s when Grava No was arrested and started talking to the authorities about Gotti's crimes. Gotti was sentenced to life in prison, and his son, John Gotti Jr., took over the family business. Number 7. The Johnston Brothers Gang. Meet Bruce Johnston, the mastermind behind the notorious Johnston Gang. Now, Bruce had a different upbringing. Raised by his grandmother Harriet Steffi and great-aunt Sarah Martin, along with his brother James Jr., Bruce didn't even start associating with his father until just a few years before he embarked on his criminal career. So, let's talk about the gang. Bruce founded and led the infamous Johnston gang, which operated primarily in Chester County back in the day. These guys had a vast network and were involved in many shady activities. We're talking about theft, from antiques to drugs. They were like modern-day Robin Hoods without the whole giving to the poor thing. Now, these gang members were no amateurs. They had some special abilities that helped in difficult situations. Opening locks was fine. Breaking into safes was easy, like something a child could do. Turning off alarm systems was very simple. They even had walkie-talkies and police scanners to stay one step ahead. And get this, when they were pulling off a job in one part of the county, they would divert the state police by making false reports of criminal activities elsewhere. Talk about cunning. Bruce Johnston Sr. was the notorious leader of their ragtag group. As the head of the family, he had been running operations for years. Then there was his son David, always trying to prove himself to his father. Norman Johnston was Bruce's brother, a volatile man with quite a temper. Richard Mitchell joined their crew as a young man, eager to learn the ropes. James Griffin provided his skills as a master criminal hacker. Edward Otter served as their inside man, having contacts throughout the city. Davis Shonley was their wheelman, able to steal any vehicle. Leslie Dale was a woman in a man's world, but she didn't let anything stop her. Gary Wayne Crouch specialized in forgery and identity theft. Richard Donnell was their infiltration expert, able to blend in anywhere. Roy Myers handled their distribution network with an iron fist. Jack W. Bain kept them armed with an endless supply of firearms. Francis Matherly was a loose cannon who lived for the adrenaline of the heist. And notorious Ansel E. Ham, whose legend on the streets was unmatched. He was the most feared of them all. Together, this ragtag collection of criminals could pull off anything. But how long until their criminal activities caught up with them? Now let's dive into the juicy part, the crimes. In August 1971, the gang targeted the Dutch Wonderland theme park. They made off with a whopping $33,000 worth of cash and property. But that was just the beginning. They kept pushing the boundaries, even crossing state lines into Maryland and Delaware, leaving a trail of stolen goods in their wake. These guys were like the Energizer bunnies of crime. In 1975, they hit the Media Heights Country Club. They drilled holes, disarmed alarms, and used dynamite to crack open a safe. They made off with $15,000 in money and golf equipment never to be recovered. These gangsters were living the high life, I tell you. In 1978, the voice of karma came knocking as the Johnston gang was under intense police surveillance. They decided to eliminate potential witnesses. It was like something out of a Mafia movie. They went on an assassination spree, targeting individuals like James's Jimmy Johnston, Dwayne Lincoln, Wayne Sampson, James Sampson, and even Bruce Johnston Jr., who miraculously survived an attempted murder. The investigation was intense, the arrests were made, and the trials were held. Bruce Johnston Sr. received 6 consecutive life sentences, while David and Norman were each slapped with 4 sentences. These guys were going away for a long, long time, but the story doesn't end there. In 1987, the Johnston brothers sought new trials, claiming that crucial information about a witness had been withheld. It was a legal roller coaster, but justice prevailed, and their convictions stood. As for Bruce Johnston Jr., his life took a different turn. After testifying against his father, he again found himself in trouble with the law. In 2013, he was arrested on drug delivery charges. He couldn't escape his past, no matter how hard he tried. He's currently serving a 7 to 14-year sentence. This gripping tale of crime, betrayal, and family bonds inspired a book, Jailing the Johnston Gang, Bringing Serial Murderers to Justice by Bruce Maude takes you on a wild ride through the courtroom drama and the dark underbelly of the Johnston Gang. Number 6. Carlos Marcello. It's hard to believe one man could build such an empire of crime under the officials' noses. Carlos Marcello was a notorious mobster who operated in New Orleans. He gained power and influence as the head of the New Orleans Mafia, earning the nickname the Little Man. Marcello was involved in various criminal activities, including political dealings, real estate development, and organized crime. Marcello was born in Tunisia in 1910 and immigrated to the United States with his family when he was a year old. He grew up in New Orleans, which had a significant Sicilian population and was a breeding ground for organized crime. Marcello engaged in petty crimes as a teenager and eventually formed connections with local gangsters. His big break came when Frank Costello, a prominent New York mobster, sought a local representative to run his operations in New Orleans. Costello arranged for Marcello's release from prison, where he had been serving a sentence for sponsoring a robbery. Marcello established himself as a critical figure in the New Orleans underworld, expanding his criminal network and gaining political influence by bribing officials. Marcello's involvement with organized crime attracted the attention of the U.S. Senate committees investigating racketeering and the Mafia. He invoked his Fifth Amendment rights and refused to answer questions during the hearings, infuriating Robert F. Kennedy, the committee's head. When Kennedy became the U.S. Attorney General, he targeted Marcello as one of his top priorities. One of the tactics used against Marcello was his lack of U.S. citizenship. In 1961, he was deported to Guatemala, claiming citizenship through a forged birth certificate. However, Marcello allegedly re-entered the U.S. soon after, sneaking back on one of his shrimp trawlers through the Louisiana Bayou. He faced charges of illegal entry, perjury, and tax evasion. Marcello's alleged involvement in the assassination of President John F. Kennedy added to his notoriety. Although circumstantial evidence linked him to the crime, no direct proof of his complicity was established. The 1979 House Select Committee on Assassinations acknowledged that Marcello had the motive, means, and opportunity to kill Kennedy, but could not definitively prove his involvement. The government pursued Marcello for many years, and he faced multiple arrests and convictions. In 1982, he was sentenced to prison for attempting to bribe officials. However, his conviction was overturned in 1989, and he was released on good behavior. Marcello died in New Orleans in 1993. The legacy of Carlos Marcello is that of a powerful and elusive mob boss who operated with impunity for many years. While his alleged involvement in Kennedy's assassination remains a subject of speculation, his reign as the godfather of the New Orleans Mafia left a lasting mark on the city's criminal history. Now it's time for today's subscriber pick. Prepare yourself for a subscriber's pick that will leave you breathless as we unveil the current Mafia bosses of 2023 and expose the captivating stories of their rise to power, the battles they've fought, and the legacies they seek to leave behind. Don't miss this rare opportunity to go behind the scenes and discover the true faces of criminal power. Stay tuned for an immersive exploration that will challenge your perceptions and leave you questioning who truly holds the reins in organized crime. Tell us which of these faces pierced your inquisition. Number 5. Patriarcha Crime Family. Once upon a time, in the bustling city of Worcester, Massachusetts, a baby boy named Raymond Salvatore Loretta Patriarcha came into the world on a memorable St. Patrick's Day in 1908. Little did anyone know that this seemingly ordinary child would become a legendary figure in organized crime. Raymond's early life in Worcester was uneventful, but everything changed when his family moved to Providence, Rhode Island. His father owned a liquor store there, and young Raymond found himself in a new city with new opportunities. However, tragedy struck when his father passed away in 1925, leaving Raymond, only 17 then, to face the world alone. Throughout his life, Raymond was no stranger to arrests and convictions. He found himself on the wrong side of the law a staggering 28 times, with 7 convictions and 4 prison sentences. He spent 11 years behind bars, and a significant portion of that time was for a murder conspiracy charge during the 1960s. But Raymond wasn't just a common criminal. His unique combination of strength and intelligence set him apart from others in his chosen field. He was known for being fair in his dealings, but those who dared to cross him quickly discovered his ruthless side. In fact, a Massachusetts state policeman once described him as the toughest guy you ever saw. During the Prohibition era, Raymond honed his skills in Providence, progressing from an associate to a member of the New York Mafia. He dabbled in various illegal activities, including prostitution and hijacking. In 1938, he was involved in a daring robbery of a jewelry store in Brookline, Massachusetts, which resulted in his conviction and imprisonment. After his release in 1938, Raymond returned to Providence, where he steadily built his influence and power throughout the 1940s. His rise to prominence involved acts of violence, including murder and the careful cultivation of political connections. In Providence, his only rival was Carlton O'Brien, an Irishman who controlled the area's race wire service. However, Raymond's men ended O'Brien's reign when they killed him in 1952. By the early 1950s, becoming a significant player in the New England crime scene became impossible without crossing paths with Raymond Patriarcha. With the retirement of Bogle in 1954, Providence became the epicenter of the New England family's operations, and Raymond took the helm. From a modest two-story building on Atwell's Avenue known as The Office, Raymond ran his criminal empire. The building housed legitimate businesses like the National Cigarette Service Company and Coin-O-Matic Distributors, but it was also the headquarters for organized crime figures in the area. Atwell's Avenue was a vibrant, bustling place, resembling an open-air market. However, beneath the surface, it was an armed camp, with spotters strategically placed to keep an eye out for law enforcement officials. This setup was reminiscent of mob-run areas like Manhattan's Little Italy and Boston's Prince Street. Despite his criminal activities, Raymond took care of those under his wing. According to Vincent Teresa, a former mob member turned government witness, nobody in the New England mob ever went hungry. Raymond made sure his men were well compensated for their loyalty and service. Raymond also forged alliances with the powerful Genovesi and Profaci Colombo crime families in New York, further solidifying his position in the underworld. He maintained a careful balance of power, ensuring his interests were protected while avoiding unnecessary conflicts with other criminal organizations. In 1984, Raymond Patriarcha passed away at the age of 76. Despite his criminal activities, he was mourned by many in the Providence community who saw him as a benevolent and generous figure. His funeral was attended by a mix of family, friends, and criminal associates, a testament to the complex nature of his life and legacy. Today, Raymond Patriarcha is remembered as one of New England's most influential figures in organized crime history. His ability to navigate the criminal underworld and his longevity in the face of constant law enforcement pressure earned him a place in the annals of American crime. While his methods were often ruthless, his impact on the criminal landscape of New England cannot be denied. Number 4. Genovesi crime family. In the gritty streets of New York City, a tale of power, crime, and dark alliances unfolded. The notorious and feared syndicate, the Genovesi crime family, ruled the underworld alongside 4 powerful families, the Gambino, Banano, Lucchese, and Colombo organizations. This alliance of crime, known as La Cosa Nostra, or simply the Mafia, held the city in its grip. Their territories were marked, their influence undeniable. Get ready for a thrilling journey into the heart of organized crime, where loyalty is deadly and power is everything. The story of the 5 families began after the Castellamarese War, a brutal power struggle among mafia groups in the early 1930s. Many high-ranking mobsters lost their lives in this conflict, named after a town in Sicily where many participants hailed from. In the aftermath, a mob boss named Salvatore Lucania, also known as Charles Lucky Luciano, established the commission. This board of directors was composed of bosses from the 5 families and other organized crime factions across the country. The commission's role was to mediate disputes, enforce order, and act as judges and executioners. It gave the 5 families permanent seats on the board, consolidating their power. At the time, Luciano was involved in various profitable criminal activities such as extortion, prostitution, gambling, and bootlegging. He became the head of one of the families, and Vito Genovese, one of his trusted associates, became the underboss or second in command of the family. However, Luciano was imprisoned in 1936, and Genovese took over as acting boss of the Genovesi family, which was considered the largest and most influential of the 5 families. In 1937, fearing prosecution for murder, Genovese fled to Italy. Despite being in exile, he maintained control of the family by staying involved in their operations' criminal and legal aspects. He even established connections with original Sicilian and Italian mafia members, which served as the model for American organized crime. During Genovese's absence, Frank Costello acted as the boss of the family. However, Genovesi was eventually arrested and extradited back to the United States. By 1946, the witnesses in his case had been murdered, and he was set free. Genovesi saw this as an opportunity to seize control of the commission and become the boss of bosses. He plotted to have Costello killed, but the assassination attempt failed. Costello survived, but he stepped down as the head of the family, allowing Genovesi to take over. In the same year, the family was renamed to honor Genovesi's leadership. Genovesi continued to make bold moves and participated in a plot to murder Umberto Albert Anastasia, the leader of Murder Incorporated, a group of elite mafia hitmen and a key ally of Costello. However, Genovesi's plans took a turn for the worse in 1957. He organized a summit of powerful mobsters known as the Appalachian Meeting in New York. It is believed that he intended to solidify his position as the leader of the Mafia during this conference. Unfortunately for him, the authorities raided the gathering and arrested around 60 mobsters, including Genovesi himself. This event drew intense attention from the FBI and undermined the power of the mob. Many members of the Mafia blamed Genovesi for the raid, speculating that Luciano, Costello, and Meyer Lansky had tipped off the authorities to thwart Genovesi's ambitions. Genovesi faced further legal troubles when convicted of drug trafficking charges in 1959. Although his control over the family was weakened, he still exerted influence from prison. In 1962, a top soldier in Genovesi's regime named Joe Valachi believed that Genovesi was planning to have him killed. In fear for his life, Valachi entered the Witness Protection Program and became the first Mafia member to publicly acknowledge the existence of the Mafia. He testified extensively about the inner workings of the mob and wrote a memoir under the urging of the U.S. Justice Department, exposing many of their secrets. This revelation shook law enforcement agencies, and coupled with the introduction of the Racketeer Influenced and Corrupt Organizations (RICO) Act in 1970, it significantly weakened the Mafia. Genovesi remained the head of the family until his death from natural causes in prison in 1969. After his passing, the Genovesi family experienced relatively long and stable leadership periods, with occasional acting bosses and prison sentences. In the 21st century, the Genovesi family is still active and reportedly involved in white-collar crimes, such as extortion, loan sharking, and gambling. In 2006, a raid led to the conviction of around 30 family members on racketeering charges. And in 2022, 6 alleged associates were arrested. Number 3. Houston crime family. Joe Chagra, a 50-year-old man with a troubled past, met a tragic end on a desolate stretch of Interstate 10 near El Paso. His life had been overshadowed by a dark chapter in history, the 1979 murder of San Antonio federal judge John Wood. However, questions persisted about how much Joe knew about his involvement in the crime. Despite testifying in court and implicating his brother Jimmy, doubts remained among those close to the case. Joe Chagra possessed genuine kindness but had a fatal flaw. He couldn't refuse anyone. People took advantage of his nature, exploiting him for their own gain. His eldest brother Lee brought Joe into their law firm, using him to boost his ego as the head of the Chagra crime family. Lee treated Joe as a possession, taking whatever he desired, including Joe's first serious love interest. Meanwhile, middle brother Jimmy, a notorious troublemaker, manipulates Joe, using him as a pawn in their tumultuous sibling rivalry and involving him unknowingly in Jimmy's drug dealings. The situation took a tragic turn when Lee's law office was robbed on Christmas Eve in 1978, resulting in Lee's murder. The stolen $450,000 was money owed by Jimmy to mob boss Joe Banano Sr. for a failed drug transaction. While Lee and Jimmy were hardened criminals, Joe was a young man dabbling in cocaine, projecting a facade of toughness. Unbeknownst to Joe, he unwittingly became entangled in the web of the Wood conspiracy when he took on Charles Harrelson as a client for an old gun charge in Harris County in February 1980. Initially, the gun charge seemed routine, but Harrelson's arrest following a cocaine-induced standoff near Van Horn revealed his true motive. The only other person aware of Harrelson's involvement in Judge Wood's murder was Jimmy, the mastermind behind it. Harrelson believed that Joe, as his attorney, would eventually discover the truth, but assumed that Joe would keep it confidential due to attorney-client privilege. During an interview with Harrelson at the Harris County Jail, Joe uncovered the shocking truth about Judge Wood's murder and the individuals responsible. At that point, the FBI had been investigating the assassination for over 2 years, with Harrelson among the suspects. Joe was dumbfounded by the revelation. However, the shock came when he unknowingly relayed the details to Jimmy during one of their visits to Leavenworth Federal Prison, where Jimmy was serving a 30-year sentence for drug charges. Unbeknownst to Joe, the FBI wiretapped Harrelson's conversations with Joe and the visits between Joe and Jimmy. A day after Joe's conversation with Harrelson, he reluctantly shared the murder details with his volatile and arrogant brother. Jimmy's furious reaction was chilling. In their exchange, Jimmy accused Joe of instigating the murder, while Joe vehemently denied any involvement, bewildered by the allegation. Jimmy's claim was absurd to those familiar with the situation, but it conveniently aligned with the government's narrative. The FBI searched Joe's home based on the wiretap evidence, uncovering not only his stash of drugs, but also the map Harrelson had given him, a map that would lead authorities to the murder weapon purchased by Harrelson's wife, Joanne. Shortly after the discovery, Joanne Harrelson, and Liz Chagra, Jimmy's wife, were arrested and held without bail. The government faced a significant challenge in their case since much of the wiretap evidence was inadmissible in court. Joe was the sole witness who could directly link Jimmy to Harrelson, but driven by an unwavering sense of familial loyalty, he adamantly refused to testify against his brother. Desperate to convict Harrelson, the government proposed a separate trial for Jimmy, putting Joe in an impossible predicament. Faced with the prospect of a cumulative sentence of 35 to 40 years on drug charges, Joe made a fateful decision. In exchange for a 10-year plea bargain regarding the Wood conspiracy, Joe agreed to fabricate a story about his involvement, allowing him to testify against Harrelson while protecting his brother. The agreement also included promises from prosecutors to assist Joe in regaining his law license. Number 2. Tijuana Cartel. Felix Gallardo and his partners Rafael Caro Quintero and Ernesto Fonseca Carrillo formed one of Mexico's most notorious drug trafficking empires in the early 1980s. Their criminal activities and subsequent arrest cemented their names as some of the most feared criminals in Mexico's history. Gallardo's life and drug smuggling business has been the subject of films, TV series, documentaries, and books, drawing parallels to the infamous Pablo Escobar. Born on January 8, 1946, in Culiacan, Mexico, little is known about Gallardo's parents. He pursued a business education after completing his lower education and joined the Mexican Federal Judicial Police as an agent. Gallardo established connections with corrupt Colombian officials and joined forces with Carrillo and Quintero, who had extensive drug trafficking experience. Together they formed the Guadalahara Cartel in 1978, after the demise of their mentor, Pedro Aviles Perez. The cartel quickly grew into one of Mexico's largest and most successful, smuggling narcotics to the United States and Europe with the help of corrupt government officials. However, their reign stopped in 1985 when Gallardo was implicated in killing DEA agent Enrique "Kiki" Camarena. The DEA launched Operation Leyenda to investigate the kidnapping and murder, making Gallardo and his associates prime suspects. Under immense pressure, Gallardo was arrested in 1989 and charged with numerous crimes, including drug trafficking and racketeering. He is currently serving a 37-year prison sentence. Gallardo's arrest led to the fragmentation of the Guadalahara Cartel into various factions, and he could not maintain control from behind bars. He is currently incarcerated in the Altiplano Maximum Security Prison in Mexico. Despite his downfall, Gallardo was once among Mexico's wealthiest individuals, with an estimated net worth of $500 million and numerous properties. He had 2 marriages, with his first wife passing away and his second marriage ending in separation. Number 1. Nicodemo Domenico Scarfo. Nicodemo Domenico Scarfo Sr., better known as Little Nicky, was a notorious figure in the American Mafia and the boss of the Philadelphia crime family. With a reputation for violence and brutality, Scarfo climbed the ranks through a life of organized crime, engaging in activities such as drug trafficking and gambling. Born on March 8, 1929 in Brooklyn, New York, Scarfo grew up in South Philadelphia after his family relocated there. He worked as a laborer and briefly pursued a career in boxing before joining his uncle's criminal enterprise in 1954. Scarfo was initiated into the Philadelphia crime family, solidifying his position within the organization. Scarfo's rise was marked by arrogance and stubbornness, including his defiance of marrying the daughter of consigliere Joe Rugnetta. This caused a temporary rift within the family. He also faced a manslaughter conviction in 1963, resulting in a brief prison sentence. However, Scarfo's criminal activities continued, and he was sent to Atlantic City, New Jersey to oversee operations there under the guidance of Angelo Bruno. In 1985, Scarfo's arrogance led to his downfall. He attempted to extort $1 million from a developer, but was ultimately betrayed by the target, who reported the scheme to the FBI. Undercover agents infiltrated Scarfo's organization, leading to his arrest and subsequent trial in 1988. Scarfo faced charges of conspiracy, racketeering, and murder. Testimony from informants revealed the extent of his crimes, and he was sentenced to 55 years in prison. Scarfo's influence extended beyond his own criminal career. His son, Nicky Scarfo Jr., followed in his footsteps and became involved in organized crime. Nicky Jr. received a 30-year prison sentence in 2015 for various crimes. Nicodemo Scarfo Sr.'s life and reign as a crime boss were marked by violence, power struggles, and a relentless pursuit of control. Although his criminal empire eventually crumbled, Scarfo's legacy as a feared and ruthless figure in the Mafia lives on. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.